Police officers of Reddit, what is your best? I think we have the wrong person story. If you enjoy this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing. I've got two, from 25 years ago, when I was a cop, one on one side of the badge, and one from the other. The first, I got assigned a warrant service to pick up a wanted felon. Mr. Robertson was 6 feet tall, 250 pounds, long red hair, bushy red beard, and lived at, let's say, 123 Elm Street. Pretty distinctive dude. So I roll up to 123 Elm Street, and sure enough, there mowing his lawn in the front yard is the man himself, 6 feet, 250, red hair, red beard. I make contact with him. Hey, Mr. Robertson, you got warrants, and it's time to go to jail. Hook him up, take him to jail, and in central booking I get his property off him, and while filling out the inventory happen to notice this guy's Mr. Robinson, not Robertson. Sure enough, the wanted guy was my guy's landlord, and his twin brother from another mother double ganger. When I'd said Robertson, Robinson didn't even twig to the fact I hadn't said his name, he just heard the similar sounding name as his own. We had to walk the whole thing back and reactivate the warrant, then kicked him loose with a handshake and an apology. The one from the other side, I had just gotten off duty at 2 AM and was driving home still in uniform. There wasn't any other traffic on the road, so I wasn't really surprised when a police car turned in behind me and started following me. I figured he was trolling for drunks, and I was the only thing moving on the road, so he was just going to follow me a little to observe my driving, and he'd realize pretty quick I was sober and peel off. Instead, another patrol car joined him, and another, and another. Then all four lit me up and spread out behind me, blocking the road in a full felony stop. Well, this just got interesting. They went through the whole procedure, and I carefully followed their instructions. When they finally got me out and saw my uniform, they just stopped for a few seconds while I was trying to figure out just what the hell was going on. Then 3 of the officers got in their cars, turned off their lights, and took off, while the original officer told me I could put my hands down and explained what was going on. My car was a spot-on match for the suspect vehicle in an armed robbery and shooting that had just occurred right up the road. I'd driven right by the scene before the cops even got there a few minutes before the officer in the next district spotted me and thought I was the suspect. It was an interesting night. 2 of my colleagues, murder squad detectives, attended custody to meet a defendant answering bail. When they arrived at the custody desk, there were a couple of people hanging around, waiting for their solicitors. They told the custody sergeant they were there for insert name, and he pointed one of the guys out. They went up and introduced themselves and said that they would be questioning him at another station, so all 3 got in the car and headed off. Whilst driving, they told the defendant what would be happening. On arrival, he would be arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, questioned and either bailed or remanded. The guy was like, "You've got to be joking, attempted murder? I was shoplifting." He was relatively calm, half laughing and shaking his head. A short time later, one of the officer got a call from the custody sergeant. Their actual bail appointment had arrived. There were 2 defendants with the same name answering bail that day. They apologized to the non-murderous shoplifter, turned the car around, and headed back to bring the right person in for questioning. Keystone cops to the maximum. There had been a string of robberies, 7 in 2 weeks, in my neighborhood, so everyone was on high alert. I was home by myself, and one of my dogs started puking, so I rushed to let him outside, forgetting my dad had set the alarm. We had a silent alarm, so I had no clue it had been tripped, sending out a dispatch request to the local 50. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I'm young, home alone by myself, and had been told to never answer the door if I was alone. So I didn't. They kept knocking. Long story short, they broke the door down. They thought they had caught the burglars. Multiple cars. I vaguely remember there being a K9 unit involved, and the police had their suspect, a 9-year-old girl, crying her eyes out. I was not the group of thieves who ended up being caught about a week later. Not a cop, but the wrong person in question. There is another man 2 years younger than me who shares my first and last name. Exact same spelling, the only difference is the middle name. Police were investigating a county trustee who was giving people housing assistance checks they didn't qualify for. They would cash the assistance and give the trustee a percentage back. One of the civilians being investigated was the other guy. A plainclothes cop in an unmarked car shows up with a female holding a clipboard, identifies himself as a state trooper, and within 5 minutes is asking me for copies of my bank records. He's threatening to subpoena if I don't comply. This isn't the first time I've been mistaken for him. I used to get his mail all the time, and I even asked if they were looking for me or the other guy, pointing out our different middle names. I got really suspicious really fast. A high pressure situation, demanding access to my financial records, threats of subpoenas, and further legal action. So I started to doubt this was an actual police officer and was in fact just a scammer. The badge he showed me was just a plastic square like my driver's license, further muddying the issue. I told him I wanted to speak with the police and called dispatch. 2 uniformed officers showed up 15 minutes later and confirmed the guy was an officer. The woman with him was some kind of auditor and records keeper. After a further 15 minutes of questions, the woman pulled the guy away and pointed out something on her phone. Yep, they wanted the other guy. I live in a small town in rural England, and we used to get some trainees/new police officers from the Met there for their training. Me and some of my friends were teenagers. We were walking to the supermarket, because what else is there to do in a small town pre-internet? Suddenly from out of nowhere this police car comes screaming out of nowhere, sirens going, and screeches to a halt in front of us. A young guy, must have only been about 5 years or so older than us, jumps out and starts giving us the whole hairdryer treatment. He lines us up and starts taking our statements of what we had been up to in the last hour / gloating at us. You lads are in trouble now. Criminal damage, trespass, theft. You have really screwed up. With him was a local Bobby, and he came up to each of us in turn after the younger guy had grilled us and said very jovially, "Now, don't worry lads, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. We've had some reports of a break-in. You don't match the preliminary description, and I'm sure we'll get this cleared up when we get the more detailed description come through." So the more detailed description comes through the radio, and the young guy is wearing the biggest shit-eating grin you've ever seen. The description didn't even remotely match, and honestly the young guy looked so disappointed we all ended up feeling sorry for him. So yeah, that was probably quite embarrassing for him. I'm not a cop, but my mom had a story for this happen to her. Basically, it revolves around the show America's Most Wanted. A woman who looked almost exactly like my mom was featured on the show. She had the same hair, same face, and the kicker, same name. They even showed my mom's actual information, which I won't list here, as being the criminals. The story ended like every story on that show does. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of this dangerous criminal, please call this number. Now on to my mom's perspective. She was just sitting at home on a Saturday night alone, as she lived alone. She was reading a Stephen King book when she hears some commotion coming from the hallway. She ignores it. Lots of yelling. She had not seen the show, which painted her as a criminal. Then suddenly bam, her door is knocked down in an instant. About 10 cops flood into her 1-bedroom apartment, and she is arrested. She explained they had the wrong person. They claimed everything matched. Social security matched. DNA matched. Name matched. Photo resemblance matched. It turns out the woman was basically stealing my mom's identity and intentionally making herself look like my mom. The end result is that when they created a profile for the criminal, they used my mom's information to start with. So when they arrested my mom, of course the information matched. It was her information originally. They kept her in jail for 2 weeks. It wasn't until they took fingerprints from the scene of a crime they said she committed, and the prints didn't match, that they realized she wasn't the criminal. It's scary to think, if they had used her profile prints, rather than crime scene prints as the set to compare to, that she would have been still in jail today. It was basically a life sentence. Not a police officer, but I'm in a class called Wildlife Law Enforcement, which is taught by a game warden. They have police powers, and can be called in, if backup is needed. My teacher is a great dude, and he loves stories. Anyways, my local police force has a way of capturing people with outstanding warrants that may or may not be common. What they do is send a letter to the perp saying they won a prize from the city. Apparently, however they deliver this makes it seem very legit. To receive your prize you have to go to the community center at a certain date and time. Then the police get you after you sign in for your prize. So in my city they set up this and sent a letter to a particular man with a very recognizable name. The day of the prize, claiming this very large old man comes in and is soon fighting against 3 officers in this community center, claiming he fought pretty damn hard thinking he was being jumped, but of course got cuffed and stuffed in the back of a squad car. The issue? They didn't check the important detail of age. They captured Senior when Junior was the one with the warrant. They assumed because of this man's very recognizable name that there could only be one. If you enjoy these videos, please consider subscribing.